Hello everybody and welcome to a tutorial on Kerbal Space Program, how to easily get to the moon if you don't really know what you're doing in Kerbal Space Program. Now the only thing that we're going to be using today is the Kerbal X stock spaceship and Mechjeb. Now, first, all we need to do once we're into the VAB, Vehicle Assembly Building in Kerbal, is we're going to pull up and load the Kerbal X stock spaceship. Now this ship has plenty of fuel to get to the moon. You don't need to make any changes to the ship. The only thing I'm going to do to the ship is to increase the number of solar panels on there. It only has 2 on it by default. And so we're going to increase the number of solar panels just to keep the batteries charged up during our mission. And then we're going to put the Mechjeb control module on here. We can do this whole thing in about half an hour is all that it will take to get to the moon. So here we're going to change the number of solar panels on the ship using the multiplication function in Kerbal Space Program. The little circle down here is for symmetry, and we just toggle that until we get the number of solar panels we want. So there's 3, 4, 6, and 8. I think we're going to go with 6. That should none of them are being covered up by any of the parts on the ship, so they'll get direct sunlight when they're pointed at the sun. And that'll keep our batteries charged up so that we can actually fly the ship, because if we run out of electricity, the ship becomes very difficult to do anything with. So we've changed that to 6 solar panels. You can also change that toggle once you've selected the part with the X key. Now this is the Mechjeb case. Once you've installed Mechjeb into your game data folder in Kerbal, we only need 1 of those. That part will show up under the Command and Control tab in the VAB. So we just have to attach that to our pod. And then we can also use Mechjeb to see our delta V statistics. It shows our staging, thrust to weight ratio, the amount of delta V in each stage, and how long each stage will burn for at full throttle. So now that we've placed the 1 Mechjeb control module case onto the pod, we're ready to launch. So here basically we just need to go through a few parameters in Mechjeb and get our ascent guidance, which is basically our takeoff autopilot. So we're going to click the Mechjeb menu here and click Ascent Guidance. Now you can move this window all around your screen, and many of the options that are on it are already fine. We're going to shoot for an altitude of 100 kilometers, so just type in 100 into orbit altitude. Inclination at 0. Check off these boxes that I'm going through here. Prevent overheats, limit Q, limit acceleration, force roll and climb, limit angle of attack. We want that checked, and we're going to change that to 7 from 5. Leave corrective steering off. That actually got broken in a new update of Kerbal Space Program, so leave that turned off. And just make sure your ascent guidance looks exactly like this. Check the boxes that I've checked. Change orbit altitude to 100, and limit angle of attack AOA to 7. Click Engage Autopilot. Press spacebar twice, and off we go. So now Mechjeb is doing pretty much all of the work here. We're just standing back and watching. It's going to get us into a stable altitude of 100 kilometers in orbit and an inclination of roughly 0. Things seem to be going well on our launch here. These are sort of asparagus stage boosters, and they'll separate as each one runs out of fuel, or each pair runs out of fuel, up to about 5.5 kilometers now. Things are going well. Now here's a little situation where we probably could have changed our roll setting in the ascent guidance so that these boosters, these last 2 final boosters, would be parallel with the horizon rather than, well, that exactly. As that booster separated, it made impact with the main body of our rocket. Fortunately, looks like it didn't do any damage here, so we're still flying up towards our orbit just fine. That didn't do anything too bad to our main body. Didn't even take off any of our little winglets or stabilizing fins down there at the bottom. So looks like we are still on track. We are now traveling at, coming up on 800 meters per second, about to break through the sound barrier. Yep, you can see the Mach effects and the heat effects on the ship. Things are starting to heat up here as we approach 25,000 meters, 2.25 kilometers above the surface of Kerbin. We've got our daring Kerbals here along for the ride. We've got Jebediah, Bill, and Bob Kerman. So yeah, this is a pretty simple thing you may want to do. If you're just getting your feet wet into Kerbal Space Program and you don't really know how to fly these missions manually, Mechjeb will really make it easy for you to just kind of get your feet wet and start learning the different functions, the controls, the menus of Kerbal Space Program, and the fun and joy of shooting big rockets into the sky and potentially crashing. So here you see that Mechjeb has turned off our main engine. At this point, our apoapsis is high enough so that we can just coast through the rest of the atmosphere at this point. So we're still just kind of sitting back and watching, sitting at about 1,880 meters per second. Now you see that Mechjeb has created our circularization burn. Now once we hit our apoapsis, which is the highest point in our orbit, it will fire the engine so that we don't just fall right back down to the planet. Once we get up high enough, we have to power the engines again to actually make our orbit stable so that we don't fall back down. You can see that this burn will take about 494 meters per second of delta V, and we currently have about 3,300 meters per second of delta V remaining, so we're doing just fine on fuel. And here you can see, if you hit the M key to toggle in and out of your map mode, you'll see that our orbit is expanding as it fires the engine. So now we have almost reached a stable orbit, and our takeoff and orbital maneuvering is complete. So now we need to take a look at our delta V. We have 2,812 meters per second of delta V, which is more than enough to get to the moon from a stable Kerbin orbit at 100 kilometers. So the next thing that we need to do is select the moon as our target. So just left click the moon, click set as target, and now Kerbal has us selected the moon as the target that we can now work with. So then we need to close out the ascent guidance and click the Mechjeb menu again, and we're going to select Maneuver Planner this time. Now there are a lot of different things you can do with Maneuver Planner, but what we need to do here to get to the moon is a Hoffman transfer to target. So select Hoffman transfer to target, and now what that's going to do is create a maneuver and autopilot functions that will create an encounter after the burn that will get us to the moon. So you see where we are now, moving counterclockwise in orbit around Kerbin. It has created a maneuver node, that little orange star-shaped little reticle there in orbit. That is the point in our orbit at which we will begin the burn. It's created an encounter that we're going to have with an escape velocity. However, I fully believe that more than likely, once we encounter the moon, we will probably crash into it without further maneuvering. This burn will take 841 meters per second of delta V, so after the burn we'll be just under 2,000 meters per second remaining. Still plenty of fuel to land on the moon. So we've created and executed this maneuver using Mechjeb, and it's doing all the work for us still, as you can see. It's basically just moving time forward until we get to the point in our orbit in which we need to execute our burn maneuver to escape Kerbin's gravity and get on our way to the moon. You'll see that Mechjeb has actually stopped the time acceleration here. It just seems to be doing kind of nothing. What actually happens here is as the ship rotates around its rotational axis through the orbit, as time passes, it gets out of alignment with the orientation that we need. The attitude of the ship gets out of alignment with how we need to point the ship to execute our burn. So it pauses it, uses the maneuvering thrusters or your SAS modules to reorient the ship in the correct direction. So we've begun our burn, and you'll notice here that this burn takes more delta V than what we have in the stage. So you're going to see the engine shut off here in just a second right there. And we need to hit the space bar twice. Once to separate the main body of the rocket from our command pod, and then space bar again to activate the engine. So 2 presses of the space bar during that maneuver will detach the main body of the rocket from our command pod, and then the second press of spacebar will activate our final stage engine. So we're almost done with our maneuver burn to escape Kerbin's orbit, or escape Kerbin's gravity, excuse me. And you can now see that our orbit is on an escape velocity from Kerbin that does make an encounter with the moon. So what we can do here is we could just let time go by, but that would take 5 hours. So we're going to click the moon encounter and click warp here. That's going to time accelerate for us automatically until we reach the encounter, which is basically, you can think of encounter as when we become captured by the moon's gravity. So, Kerbal Space Program is time warping us to our encounter with the moon, where we have a couple more maneuvers that we need to do before we can land. I apologize for my squeaky chair. Alright, so now the moon has captured us into its orbit, and you'll see the blue line here shows us more or less crashing into the moon on our current trajectory. This is not ideal. We're going to do things, well, we're not going to crash into the moon. That's not ideal here. But what you can see is that the blue line represents our orbit in reference to the moon. And currently, if we didn't do anything at all, we would crash right into the face of the moon currently. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our periapsis using the Mechjeb maneuver planner. So in the maneuver planner, select the drop-down menu, and we're going to do 2 things here. We're going to change our inclination and we're going to change our periapsis. But we're going to start with our periapsis. The periapsis is the lowest point in your orbit. So basically this is the closest we'd ever get to the moon if we type in this number. Now that's 25 kilometers. We don't want to get any closer than that because we do actually want to get in a stable orbit around the moon. So we're going to set our periapsis to 25 kilometers, and we're going to select after a fixed time. Set this to 30 seconds. That'll give your ship plenty of time to reorient itself to prepare for the execution of this burn. Now this will just be a small burn, and all we're going to do here is basically make it so that we never get any closer than 25 kilometers to the surface of the moon. You'll also see that after this maneuver, the orange dotted line shows that our orbit is very inclined, meaning that it kind of looks like we're going to hook around the side of the moon, and as we come around we're going to be headed down underneath the rest of the solar system. Essentially, if you think about it in a big plane, we're not at all currently aligned with the rest of the solar system. So we're also going to change our inclination after this. So that burn's complete, and we have set our periapsis to 25 kilometers. Now we're going to change our inclination so that our orbit is in plane with the rest of the solar system. We're going to leave this at the default 0 degrees inclination. The only thing we're going to do is change in the time that we burn. So we're going to also set this to a fixed time of 30 seconds. So that gives the ship time to orient itself before the burn, and everything times properly. So now that we've set 30 seconds to our inclination burn, click Create and Execute, and Mechjeb will do the rest for us. So we have changed our periapsis to 25 kilometers and our inclination to 0, and you can see it all happening right here in front of us. We actually were in orbit that would have taken us close to circling the moon in a clockwise orbit, but we actually want to be counterclockwise. That's ideal. So that's complete. Now you can see that we're in the plane with the rest of the solar system at an inclination of roughly 0. We've set our periapsis, which is the closest point we're going to get to the moon, to 25 kilometers. The problem we have now is that we're traveling too fast. 356 meters per second. I'm sorry, 356 meters per second is just too fast to orbit the moon. If we'll come close to it, 25 kilometers, but we're going too fast. So we'll actually just slingshot around the moon and take off into the rest of the solar system, who knows where. So what we need to do is circularize, which is also called a retroburn. We basically are just going to slow ourselves down. So we're going to use the maneuver planner here again to circularize at the next periapsis, which basically means that once we hit our lowest point, or the closest that we're going to get to the moon, we're going to fire the engines backwards to slow us down and find that balance so that we can stay in a stable orbit around the moon, and then we can prepare for landing. So here we are coming up on our circularization burn at roughly 25 kilometers. You can see we're at 26 kilometers now. We'll be executing our burn anytime. And basically we've just pointed the ship backwards compared to our current trajectory. We're going to fire, Mechjeb is firing the engines for us to slow us down. It's going to take about 200 meters per second of delta V. We'll end up at about 1480, it looks like, meters per second of delta V after the burn's complete. So now we're in a stable orbit around the moon at about 25 kilometers, and we could essentially orbit like this forever, but who wants to stop there? Let's go ahead and land. So we've got 1482 meters per second of delta V and an incredible thrust to weight ratio because the moon's gravity is quite low compared to Kerbin. So we can also use Mechjeb again to help us land this thing. So we're done with maneuver planner for now. We're going to bring up the Mechjeb menu and we're going to try a different part of this program called landing guidance. This is pretty easy to do. We're going to just basically pick a target on the map. I check off show landing predictions because I like to see all of the details about what's going on with Mechjeb during our landing procedure. You want to make sure auto warp and deploy landing gear are checked off. Uncheck deploy parachutes and use RCS for small adjustment because there's no need to use parachutes on the moon. There is no air, and our ship does not have reaction control systems, which are basically the little jets that will orient your ship. We're using gyros on this ship instead of those. So now you can see our reticle on our mouse cursor has changed to this little targeting system. So we're going to click pick target on map, and I've chosen a spot in our orbit that's close to the plane that we're on, so that we don't have to make a major height adjustment up or down to land. We'll basically be in the same plane. I chose a spot that wasn't like the edge of a crater so that we don't land on a very inclined bit of surface that would cause our ship to tip over upon landing. So once you pick the landing spot, we're just going to let Mechjeb do its thing here. And you can see we had to circle around because we had already passed the point in which we want to land. So it's circling around to where it's going to fire again in retrograde. Again, just firing the engines backwards to slow us down so that instead of maintaining our orbit, we land on the moon. Mechjeb is a really great way to kind of get your feet wet into Kerbal. It can be a little bit overwhelming. We're beginning our landing burn, or as Mechjeb shows, it's a deorbit burn. And again, basically we're just firing backwards to slow us down so that we stop orbiting and we start landing. You see our speed going down, 130, 120, 10. And basically we're just killing our horizontal velocity so that the gravity overcomes our speed and pulls us down to the surface. Mechjeb does a great job of landing on non-atmospheric bodies in Kerbal. It doesn't do so well with the atmosphere and the thermal heating problems that you have of speeding through a gaseous atmosphere. It creates a lot of heat problems, but you can see our shadow below us here, indicating that we're getting closer to the surface. Mechjeb will automatically fire our engines and engage our landing gear. And basically it's killing our horizontal velocity now so that we can come straight down and we don't land with, basically you don't want to land sliding to one side or the other. That would make it difficult to land because your landing gear would just grab the surface and then try to tip your ship over. So Mechjeb has us coming straight down, which is how you would want to do it if you were piloting manually. Coming down, firing our last burn here just to slow us down to a reasonable speed to make a nice soft landing on the moon. Now, of course, you can fly all of this manually. You can use Kerbal to play however you like, but I wanted to show a way that people who are new to Kerbal can use this really handy autopiloting program called Mechjeb to learn how to use Kerbal while at the same time actually accomplishing things, because you can spend a lot of time in Kerbal Space Program doing a whole lot of nothing because it's got a little bit of a steep learning curve. There's a lot to learn if you're not super familiar with orbital mechanics and thrust to weight ratios, delta V, fuel efficiency, fuel requirements. We're gonna get out of our ship here for a minute and let our Kerbal explore the surface of the moon. Here you can right click the ladder extender, the Telus mobility extender enhancer, excuse me, and that'll drop the ladder down so we can safely descend from the command module to the lunar surface in our space travel endeavors. You can use the WAS and D keys on your keyboard to move your Kerbal around and enjoy yourself in this barren wasteland that orbits Kerbin. But we've done it! We've successfully landed on the moon. Look at the look on his face. He is so excited to be here. It's one small step for I'm not sure how to use that in the proper tense, but one small step for Kerbals, one giant leap for Kerbal kind. Site name, let's call this Moon Landing 1 on 1. Perhaps we should do something that wasn't too hard. No, that wasn't too bad. Mechjeb made it pretty easy for us. No, that wasn't too hard, other than the fact that we're stranded here, stuck here. Yes, we did not build a ship with enough fuel to land on the moon and get home. That sets us up for perhaps a future mission where we can come and rescue our Kerbals from the face of the lunar surface, because currently they are stuck here. We did not build a ship that can get us back. That is a little bit more complex. I wanted to do this using a stock ship with Kerbal, using only Mechjeb, and no piloting skills required. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, how to play Kerbal and get to the moon at least. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. If you need help installing Mechjeb, I will post a link to the forum page with a download link and detailed instructions on how to install Mechjeb Autopilot into your Kerbal Space Program so that you can do this too. If you like the video, please click like. If you dislike it, go ahead and click dislike. Thank you again very much for watching, and stay tuned for future Kerbal Space tutorials because this game is a lot of fun still. Thank you, and enjoy.